Health, Psychology and Human Nature with André Sturesson. Hey friends, hope you're having a great day. Are you following me on Instagram and Facebook? Please go to Health, Psychology and Human Nature on Instagram or Facebook, or both for that matter, to get the latest episodes, inspiration and more. Please take a pause and go there. Also, if you like the episode, please share it with a friend, family member, or somebody else who you think might like it. Welcome back, friends, to Health, Psychology and Human Nature with André Sturesson, a science-focused podcast where we explore, learn, and improve our lives together. Are you interested in ways in how to improve your life? In today's episode, Massimo tells us about how to practice Stoicism, a practical philosophy of life. He tells us about how to improve upon yourself, how to exercise the dichotomy of control, which is the main concept in Stoicism, how to get going with practicing Stoicism, and a lot more. Professor Massimo Pigliucci is known for popularizing Stoicism with his TEDx talk that has been viewed more than 400,000 times, and also his short TED video that has been watched more than 4 million times. He's also written books, two of which is the book How to be a Stoic, and the second one is A Handbook for New Stoics. And it's the second book that we are focusing on in today's episode. Friends, I really hope you enjoy today's episode. Welcome back, Massimo.
It's a pleasure to be here.
It's a real honor having you back. I have to tell you something I wrote when I was journaling.
Go ahead.
So after our last conversation, I wrote, this is just a really small thing here, but I wrote that the dichotomy of control is really powerful. I have already seen the effect in my life at several occasions. And then I start, the sauna was off. Sometimes the sauna is off, not in my control. And then I wrote, a grilled chicken popped open in my bag, not in my control. That is what packages do sometimes.
Yep, absolutely. You're getting it right.
Yeah. So it's I think we'll get into that later on, especially now during these times. I think that the dichotomy of control is very interesting. But I think perhaps if you can just give us just a short reminder for those that didn't listen to the last episode and for those that haven't heard about Stoicism, just a very short summary of what Stoicism is.
Well, Stoicism is an ancient Greco-Roman philosophy, which I often refer to as kind of the Western equivalent of Buddhism, because they're actually very close in terms of the ethics, in terms of how to deal with other people, how to interact with other people, even though their metaphysics is very different. The basic idea of Stoicism is that we should live, as the Stoics used to say, according to nature. And that means according to the best of human nature. And the Stoics thought that the best part of human nature is made of two components. One, that we are highly sociable animals, and two, that we're capable of reason. So it followed from that to live a fulfilling human life, we need to train ourselves to use reason in order to improve society, social living. So it's a very sort of outward, other regarding philosophy. What makes meaningful a human life meaningful, according to the Stoics, is the fact that you're going to try to be the best human being you can, and that means the most social human being that you can. In practice, the way this works is that there are a couple of ways of approaching it, but the two fundamental ideas are that we should exercise what you just referred to as the dichotomy of control, which is actually a modern term. It's not found in ancient Stoic texts, but nevertheless, the basic idea is that as Epictetus, the early second century Stoic philosopher who influenced the Emperor Marcus Aurelius, put it, some things are up to us and other things are not up to us. And a key to a good life is to distinguish between the two, focus on what is actually under your control, because that's the actionable part. That's the thing that you can actually do. and then develop an attitude of equanimity toward the things that are not under your control. Understanding, as any adult human being would, that sometimes you win, sometimes you lose, sometimes things go your way, sometimes they don't. The other basic practical idea is that we should navigate life by using 4 cardinal virtues as our moral compass, and these are practical wisdom, courage, temperance, and justice. And the notion there is that anything that we are about to do, we should ask ourselves, well, is this wise? Is it courageous? Is it just? Is it temperate? And if the answer is yes, then do it. If the answer is no, then don't do it.
Right. And in your book, A Handbook for New Stoic, which is a very practical book about how you can learn how to actually practice Stoicism. Sorry,
go ahead.
Yeah, sure. Yes. So you're right that betting on your own improvement is guaranteed to have the best payoff, is something like you write in your book. I was wondering if you could explain what you mean about that.
Yeah, that's an excellent question. This is one of the fundamental notions that both Epictetus and Seneca, first century Stoic, who was the advisor to the Emperor Nero, insist over and over. Here's the notion: most of us grow up in a way that leads us to bet our happiness on externals. So we're told since we're children, externals meaning things that are not actually under our control. So, for instance, we're told when throughout growing up that it's a good thing if we make money, if we have a good career, if we become famous. All the role models that we're bombarded with by television, advertisements, and so on and so forth. They're all about externals, right? You want success means making money, having a nice house, marrying a handsome person, all that sort of stuff. And we are told that that's what will make us happy. Now, the problem is that all of those things are, in fact, not under our control. Obviously, we can work toward them. You can definitely work toward making money. You can work toward your career. You can work toward your relationships, all that sort of stuff. But ultimately, the outcomes are not up to us, meaning that you can do the best that you can in all of those areas, and something might happen due to external circumstances, and you may fail. So if you bet your happiness on externals, in that way, you risk, you're essentially, as Seneca puts it, you're putting yourself in the hands of fortune. If fortune doesn't go your way, if your luck doesn't go your way, then you're screwed. Now, the Stoic bet, on the other hand, is to focus on internal things in terms of your happiness. Internalize your goals. So, for instance, instead of saying, my happiness depends on having a great career, you say, my happiness depends on making my best at doing my best at my job. Whether that works or not in terms of outcomes, it's not up to me, but definitely working on it is up to me. You can say my happiness doesn't depend on finding the ideal mate for my life. My happiness depends on doing my best in order to be the best person I can in a relationship. That way, you're guaranteed to succeed because doing your best is up to you. Nobody else is going to interfere in it, and it's not like people can force you not to do your best. Doing your best is up to you. So that's the notion that if you move from what comes natural, which is focusing on external goals, to what the Stoics suggest, which is focusing on internal goals, then you're basically guaranteed to be happy because you retrain yourself to be content with efforts, independent of outcomes. And the reason for that, of course, is, again, the dichotomy of control, because efforts are under your control, they're up to you, outcomes are not.
Right. So even though it's not 100% that you will get rich, but at least if you try, and if that's what you're actually focusing on, trying to do your best, then you also will increase the chance of being rich. But being rich is not the goal. Doing your best is the goal.
Exactly.
Yeah,
exactly. And of course, as you just pointed out, usually there is a pretty good correlation between doing your best and actually succeeding, right? I mean, if I do my best as a student, it's very likely that I'll pass the test. If I do my best at work, it's likely that I'll get promoted.
Yeah.
If I do my best in a relationship, it's likely that my relationship is going to work. Those kind of things. There's no guarantee, but certainly doing your best is literally your best bet.
Right, for sure. I've been trying to do some of the practices, and I've actually done the first two exercises of your book a couple of times. And from reading your book, what I understand about Stoicism is that it's a lot of focus on actually training your mind, so actually focusing on your software. Is that something that you believe as well? That is the main focus, kind of?
Yeah. So critics of Stoicism often sort of say that, well, this is just a mind trick, right? So that Stoicism is just about a mind trick. And in a sense, they're right, except that, of course, all our life is a mind trick. I mean, we navigate our life according to certain ways of thinking that are ingrained in us, right? So we always automatically deploy certain ways of thinking, certain frameworks about everything we do. It's not like events from the outside come with labels that say that an event is good or bad, or catastrophe, or whatever it is. Everything that we understand about life, how we navigate our life, depends on our mind, on our attitude. Okay. So for instance, if I get laid off in my work, the automatic label that most people would attach to it is, oh, that's a catastrophe. It's a horrible thing. Now I lost my job. Now how am I going to pay my bills? That sort of stuff. But the thing in itself, it's not a catastrophe. It's just a thing. It's just an event, right? You had a job until today, and tomorrow you're not going to have that job. That's just the event. That's an objective fact about the world. Whether this is a catastrophe or not, whether you should be thinking about a catastrophe or not, that's actually up to you.
Yeah.
It may very well be an opportunity, right? It may very well be that, hey, you know what? I didn't look for other jobs before because I was, cozy and kind of lazy in my position. But in fact, I was kind of feeling like I wasn't going anywhere. I wasn't too happy about my job. So now I'm forced to actually take action and look for something else. So this may be actually an opportunity for something. So the point is that, yes, Stoicism is a mind trick in the sense that a lot of Stoic training is about changing the framework by which you assess situations. But what people often don't seem to grasp is that we always apply frameworks. So it's not that Stoicism is a mind trick. Life is a mind trick. Human life is a mind trick. And so Stoicism is simply about choosing the trick that works for you, as opposed to the trick that you may have inherited from your childhood, or because your parents told you, or something like that.
But then it's also a lot about choosing the things that seem the best from a rational point of view as well, right?
Yes. So the Stoics, as I pointed out in the beginning, they thought that the most crucial characteristics, the best characteristics of the human species, are our sociability and our ability to reason. So yes, reason is high in the scale of value of Stoics. And whenever I say that, of course, people say, "Oh, but what about emotions? Life is not just reason." It's like, okay, first of all,
for the millionth time.
Yes, for the millionth time. First of all, there is actually no sharp distinction in the human mind between reason and emotion. The Stoics thought that the human mind is a unitary thing, that reason and emotions are just two aspects of the same thing. And modern neurobiology confirms that. There's no separation, no sharp separation between reason and emotions. What we have in the human brain is areas that tend to work mostly more about, sort of decision making, like the frontoparietal lobes, for instance, and areas of the brain that are more involved with emotions, like the amygdala. But the two are highly interconnected. I mean, there are literally hundreds of millions of neural connections between the two of them. So you cannot really separate one from the other. That's number one. Number two, when people complain that Stoicism puts too much emphasis on reason, right? Because we are under the impression somehow that the problem with the world is that there is too much reason. Right?
Yeah.
But how does that come about? I mean, I'll let you know when I'll feel that there is too much reason in the world. I don't think we're nowhere near close to that point.
Exactly. That's a very good point. When there's enough reason, yeah. And from my understanding, it's kind of like the Stoics. This is just how I think about it. I mean, that they talked and they thought and discussed all of these kind of things, how to live your life, how to make sense of things, how to best react. And then with reason, they just, okay, so this is kind of the best way to react, or this should probably be the best way to live. And then that is something that just evolved with Stoicism.
Yes. So let me give you a specific example. Just this morning, just before you called, I put out, I've actually prepared one of my daily short meditations. I have a podcast called Stoic Meditations. And basically every day during the week, I put out like a 3 or 4 minutes about Stoicism. And usually I start with a quote, and then I explain. So the quote, I have a short reflection on the quote. And today the quote was from Musonius Rufus, who was Epictetus' teacher, and he was one of the most famous teachers of Stoicism in ancient Rome in the 1st century. Now, Musonius says that the human faculty that makes us similar to the gods is the ability to correctly assess our impressions. Now, what the hell does that mean? An impression is your first automatic judgments about things. So whenever we see something, or we hear something, or we have a thought about something, usually those perceptions or those thoughts come with an automatic judgment, an implied judgment. And the notion, that's what the Stoics call an impression. And the Stoic notion is that we should actually never go with the impression itself as it presents itself, but always challenge it by reason. So let me give you a specific example. Let's say that I just heard that Apple is about to put out a new iPhone, right? And so my first automatic thought, my impression, is that I should definitely get the iPhone, because then the implied judgment of that impression, so that desire that I immediately feel to get the iPhone, is underlined by a judgment, basically an argument that I don't state to myself. It's automatic, but it will go something along the lines of, hey, Apple makes great phones. Great phones are useful technologies. I need a useful technology. Useful technologies are good for me. Therefore, I need the iPhone. Right? So that would be the implied judgment that I have, and that motivates my desire of getting the new iPhone. Now, Musonius Rufus says, right, now, before you just go to the Apple website and spend $1,000, slow down for a minute. Right? Challenge your impression. Take a look at the argument implied by that impression and see if it actually works. Sometimes it might work. Sometimes it may be the case that, actually, as it turns out, my old phone just broke. I do need a new one, so why not? But more often than not, Musonius says, you will actually challenge your impression, and it will turn out that your impression was based on faulty reasoning. In this particular case, I say to myself, hold on, I already have an iPhone. It works perfectly fine. It's last year's model. There's nothing I need on top of what it actually does, and I could save myself $1,000 and use it for something else. Right? So if I do that, I use reason to challenge my desires.
Right. Exactly. And something else that I find very interesting when it comes to practicing Stoicism is that you write also that Stoicism is roughly 1 part theory and 9 parts practice.
Right.
What do you mean by that?
Well, first thing is you shouldn't take the numbers, of course, too seriously.
Yeah.
One could, right? One could
exactly.
Right. Yeah. One could argue that it's 2 parts and 8, or it's 1 part and 99 part. I mean, whatever. But the point is that it's mostly about the practice, right? So the Stoics themselves often use an analogy, two important analogies for their practice, for their philosophy. One with the health of the body, with medicine, and the other one with exercise, going to the gym. Right? Now, in both cases, both medicine and going to the gym, obviously there is a theory behind it, right?
Yeah.
Unless you go to a quack, if you go to a real doctor, there is actual theory behind what makes for a healthy human body. Okay, but the theory by itself doesn't get you a healthy human body. If you know as a theoretical piece of information that you should eat a healthy diet, that you should exercise, that you should take certain medications if you have certain conditions, but then you don't do it, then your theoretical knowledge doesn't amount to anything. It doesn't make you healthy. And of course, that theoretical knowledge is a small fraction of the practice, because the practice needs to be done every day. If I decide if it's a good theoretical piece of information that a diet of mostly vegetables, let's say, is healthy for me, then the practice means that every single day I need to eat vegetables, or mostly vegetables. Right? So it's a small component of theory. It's important, of course. The theory, I don't want to give people the impression that the theory is not important. It's important, because if you don't know the right theory, if you don't understand the right theory, then you're definitely going to use the wrong diet, right? The same goes with exercise. So suppose that you go to the gym, initially you don't know anything about exercising. So you take a trainer. And the trainer is going to explain to you about the machines at the gym, how to properly use the weights and things like that, right? Now, that theory, that bit of theoretical knowledge is very important, because if you don't actually exercise correctly, not only you're not going to improve your cardiovascular capacity, you're not going to improve your muscle capacity, and so on and so forth, but you might actually hurt yourself. Right? Yeah. If you don't use the machines or the weights properly, for instance, you can hurt yourself. But the theoretical part is a fraction of it. Once the trainer has explained to you, 2 or 3 sessions and whatever it is, how to use the machine, that's it. Now you have the knowledge. Now the really difficult and long part is to actually get to the gym every day, or at least several times a day, and actually use the stuff, actually do it. So that's what I mean by the same goes for Stoic practice. I mean, understanding the dichotomy of control, or understanding what the 4 virtues are about, it's really not rocket science. And Epictetus explicitly says that. Well, he doesn't use the word rocket science because there were no rockets at the time. But he says, look, this stuff is pretty simple. You understand, you understand the concept. He tells to some of his students at some point in the discourse. The discourse is a book in 4 volume by tell us about how Epictetus basically was dealing with his students. And at some point, he tells his students, like, you guys understand the theory when you're here, meaning in my classroom. You seem to understand things, but then you go out and you behave like Aristotelians, which for him was an insult, or as Epicureans. It's like, so that means you understand the theory, but you don't practice. And so what the heck are you doing? You're wasting your time. And by the way, you're wasting my time.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's about it's knowing the stuff, but it's a lot about doing the stuff. And when it comes to doing the stuff, what would you say? Like, what is Stoic training in a nutshell?
Well, largely Stoic training, although, as you know, the book that I co-wrote with Greg, A Handbook for New Stoics, actually includes 52 exercises, which is a large number. Yeah. And by the way, I should say, before I answer your question, if people don't feel like committing to all 52 exercises, that's a whole year worth of exercises. We actually provided right at the beginning of the book a shortcut. We suggest a short number of exercises, small number of exercises, like 9 of them, I think, that are actually the best way to get started. Now, all of these exercises are different. Some exercises are sometimes a meditation. Other ones are actually more physical exercises, like fasting or things like that. But the thing that all of them have in common is using your mind to reframe things to yourself. That's really the fundamental trick, if you want, the fundamental idea, that you should never do important things in your life without thinking. Thinking it through. Seneca says in one of the letters that he wrote to his friend Lucilius, which are a classic of Stoicism, he says, all it takes for the pilot on the ship to cause a wreck is a moment of distraction. Nothing ever got better by not paying attention. Right? So if you pay attention to what you're doing, if you actually are mindful about what you're doing, there is a word that the Stoics use, Epictetus uses in particular, it's prosoche. Prosoche often is translated in contemporary English as Stoic mindfulness. And however, it's very different from the kind of Buddhist mindfulness, or especially Zen Buddhism mindfulness that maybe some people are familiar with. It's, in fact, in some sense, it's kind of the opposite. Instead of sort of emptying your mind with thoughts or letting thoughts float in your mind, it's kind of the opposite. You focus it very sharply on what you're doing right here, right now. You pay attention. In fact, often the proper translation of prosoche is attention. You pay attention to things. And so the Stoic fundamental trick, almost all of the exercises that we suggest in the book with Greg, really have to do with the notion that you need to train yourself to pay attention to things, to reason through things, so that you're going to do the best that you can do.
You said that using the mind to reframe things, that is kind of one of the most important things. Could you elaborate on that?
Yeah, so that is something that the Stoics discovered 2,000 years ago or more, but the modern psychologists have also rediscovered and described, and it's called, in fact, the framing effect. This is a well-known phenomenon in psychology. The framing effect is this phenomenon in human psychology where if you present things differently to people, the same exact thing, but from a different perspective, people will react very differently. For instance, if you go to the doctor and you suspect that you have some kind of disease, and the exams come back, and the doctor sits you down and says, you have a 90% chance of surviving this. Or the same doctor comes back with the same exams, exactly same situation, and he tells you, you have a 10% chance of dying.
Right.
People will react very differently to the two situations. The factual information is exactly the same. 90% survival or 10% death rate is exactly the same thing. It's factually is the same information, so there is no reason why we should react differently. But the human mind is wired in such a way that we do react differently.
Yeah.
Right? So it makes a lot of difference the way you present things. And basically, the Stoics exploit the framing effect to their own advantage. They say, aha, instead of, so something is happening, and instead of thinking immediately, oh, this is a catastrophe, I think of it, oh, this is a challenge. Let me see how I do.
Right.
My colleague, Bill Irvine, who is a Stoic practitioner, wrote a book earlier this year, published a book earlier this year called, last year, called The Stoic Challenge. And basically the entire book is about the framing effect. And what he suggests there, he goes through a number of examples, both personal examples and examples from the literature, where he says, over and over, whenever your immediate sort of instinct is to say, oh, this is a catastrophe, this is a horrible thing or something like that, stop right there and rephrase it to yourself. Say, oh, here comes a challenge. Let me see how I'm going to do with this in this situation, right? Because if you start with the catastrophe frame, you're immediately going to sort of desperate, non-acting, sort of path. If on the other hand you reframe it as, oh, this is a challenge, then a challenge implies action. The immediate thought is, okay, what can I do about this? When is it that where can I exercise some control so that I can actually get something done and move in the right direction, as opposed. By the way, this is also, I mentioned sort of modern psychology in a kind of a vague a vague reference to modern psychology, because the framing effect is actually very well known by psychologists. But there is a specific type of psychological therapy called the rational emotive behavior therapy, which was started in the 1960s by Albert Ellis here in New York. And Ellis insisted precisely on this point. He actually coined the word catastrophizing, when people react to certain external situations by immediately thinking, oh, this is horrible, this is terrible, right? That we call that catastrophizing. And he said, don't do that. You need to train yourself not to do that, because catastrophizing immediately paralyzes you. It directs your thoughts into a negative direction, and you feel like you're hopeless. There's nothing you can do about it, and you just start, becoming anxious or depressed or whatever it is. And he says, instead of catastrophizing, the first thing you need to do is to ask yourself, okay, how bad is this thing really, and what can I do about it? And that is an example of the framing effect.
Exactly. So it's a lot about framing things in a different way, and also and there's also a lot of other exercises in your book as well. And I think perhaps if we could go into how you can practically do an exercise. And I think that probably the best thing to take as an example is to take the dichotomy of control, since you write also in your book that it's the concept in Stoicism. So perhaps we should just take it once again. If you would just summarize, just very shortly, the dichotomy of control. What is it?
Yes. So, as you know, this is the very first exercise in the book, right?
Yeah.
And the exercise is based on this very famous quote by Epictetus, which I'm going to read. It says, "Of all existing things, some are in our power, and others are not in our power. In our power are thought, impulse, will to get, and will to avoid. And in a word, everything which is our own doing. Things not in our power include the body, property, reputation, office, and in a word, everything which is not in our own doing." So let's pause for a second and see precisely what Epictetus is saying there, and then maybe I can walk you through the exercise itself, so to give your listeners a sort of a sense of how you actually do that exercise.
Sounds great. Yeah.
Other than just reading the quote. So first of all, the words in English are a little bit sort of imprecise. The English, there's no precise English. This is not the fault of the translator. It's just that it's difficult to render the original Greek because Epictetus wrote in Greek. The original Greek than in modern English. But let's see exactly what he says is under our control. He says that there are only four things: thought, impulse, will to get, and will to avoid. Now, especially the first two are not what most people in English would understand by those words. By thought, Epictetus doesn't mean that you control your thoughts, because he was aware that a lot of your thoughts are actually autonomic, that they come to your mind, things come to your mind, and you don't control them. Right? So if I say now, to use the classic example, if I now tell you not to think about a pink elephant, I bet you're thinking about a pink elephant. Right? So obviously that's an example of a thought that you don't control.
Yeah, exactly.
I just put it there. Right?
Yeah,
you don't
he's
control.
here. He's here
so,
now.
Yeah. So what does he mean? Yeah. So what does it mean? It doesn't mean thought in the general terms. It means judgments, deliberate thoughts, decisions, assessment of things. So when I was using my example earlier of the iPhone, should I get my iPhone or should I not? My decision, my judgment that I need the iPhone or I don't need the iPhone, that's what it means here. That's what it's under my control. That kind of thought.
Thinking about things, like valuing things, reasoning about things.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Evaluating or judging things. The second one is impulse. Now, again, people say, well, I don't control my impulses. If I have the impulse to get up and go for a beer, I don't control that. No, that's right. You don't control that, although you do control the getting up. You don't control the impulse of wanting to get a beer, but you do control the getting up or not. But what impulse here means is a decision to act or not to act. In fact, the beer example is perfect. You may have a sudden desire for a beer, okay? But let's say right now I'm sitting here, it's 10:30 in the morning in New York, and I may get thirsty, and I say, I'm thirsty now. I don't control that one. The thirst just comes. And then I say, it would be nice to have a beer. But I also say, wait a minute, I'm in the middle of taping a podcast, it's 10:30 in the morning. What am I doing drinking a beer, right? That's not a good thing. So that's that's the impulse to act or not to act. In other words, the decision to act or not to act. That is what Epictetus says is under our control. I can decide that, you know what, no matter how much I crave a beer at this moment, this is just not the right time to do it, so I'm not going to do it. And then finally, the last two things that Epictetus says are under our control, they actually go together. And the way he puts it is the will to get and the will to avoid. Sometimes these are called your desires and your aversions. What he means there is, again, your considered judgments about what you should want and should not want. So your desires are not under your control. They can become automatic, right? Now, I desire, again, to use the same example, I desire a beer. Well, that's not under my control. That desire is not under my control. But should I desire a beer at 10 o'clock in the morning? If I find myself in that situation often, then I might think that I have a problem, and I need to work on that problem.
Yeah.
Right. So this is a question. So basically, what Epictetus is saying is that the only things that are under our control are our considered judgments to act or not to act on things. That's really the only thing. Everything else, which he lists in the second part of the quote, is not under our control. We can influence it, right? We can influence our job, it says, our body, our health, our property, our reputation, our job, and so on and so forth. Those we can influence, but they're not under our control because they also depend on external circumstances. Now, let me see how you're going to go through the actual exercise. So what do we say with Greg? What are you actually supposed to do? So suppose you have a meeting with your boss, okay, to discuss, let's say, sales numbers. You're salesperson, and you have this meeting coming up, and you're anxious because your sales have not been as good as they might have been, and or certainly not as good as your boss expects. So you're kind of worried about what your boss is going to say and how you're going to justify your performance, that sort of stuff. This is a very, very normal situation, right? Basically, we're talking about a job performance evaluation.
Yeah.
Now, the way you're supposed to do this exercise is you write down first the situation, and you say, I'm going to meet with the boss at 2 p.m. this afternoon to discuss the sales number, et cetera, et cetera. Now, you then you draw a table with 2 columns, things that are under your control and things that are not under your control. Or to be more precisely, things that are up to you and things that are not up to you. And then you start breaking down the situation and putting things into 2 columns. So for instance, things that are up to me are the intent to show up on time at the meeting, right? But things that is not up to me is actually showing up on time at the meeting. Because guess what? I live in New York. There are subways. There may be a delay. And the delay is certainly not under my control. So I might be late at the meeting. So the intention to show up at the right time is mine, is under my control. The actually showing up at the right time is not. Next in the list, valuing my boss's opinion of me and my work, that is under my control. Because that's a value judgment, right? I say to myself, I should be paying attention to what my boss is saying because he has good opinions, usually good opinion, good feedback. What is not in my control is my boss' actual opinion of me and my work. That one I don't control. That's up to him or her. Third on the list, I do control the wish to meet my quota, right? To achieve whatever goal it's been set for me. I wish to achieve it. That is under my control, to do my best to achieve it. Actually meeting my quota is not under my control because that depends on other things. I can't force people to buy stuff, right?
Right.
So, I can entice them, but I certainly cannot force them. Fourth example, the same idea. What is under my control? Well, it's the desire to get actionable tips from my boss. That's under my control. Right? I want this evaluation to go well, to get something out of this evaluation, to get some tips that I can actually use. Great, that's under my control. Actually getting useful tips from my boss is not under my control because that depends on whether he does or does not have good tips. That's up to him. And then finally, fifth example, conscious nervous thoughts about and what I tell myself about the situation, that's under my control. Right? So if I repeat myself, oh my gosh, this is going to go awful, I'm going to be fired, that's under my control. Instead of doing that, I can say to myself, no, this is actually a good thing. I'm going to learn something, etc. But automatic thoughts about and feelings of being nervous, that's not under my control because those are automatic thoughts. I can't help being nervous. I can, however, control the story that I tell myself, the narrative that I tell myself. So you might have noticed that these 2 columns are all about, they have something in common. All the things in the first column under up to me, those are all internal judgments, right? And all the things in the second column, the things that are not up to me, are all external outcomes, right? So the first column is all about my intentions. The second one is all about outcomes. And so the notion here of this exercise is that you can apply this to pretty much anything that worries you or anything that is a task that you need to, to accomplish or project that you're doing or anything like that. You can always sit down for a few minutes, draw 2 columns, and then explicitly, slowly going through, breaking down the aspects of the situation and breaking them down specifically into these 2 groups. What is it that is up to you, and what is it that is not up to you, or not entirely up to you? And this is helpful because, of course, what's going to happen is that you're going to focus, once you have that list, you are going to focus on the first part, the things that are up to you, and you're going to try to remind yourself that the second part is, you just need to take it for what it is because you don't control it.
Yeah, how do you do that? How do you not think about the end result and focus more on your intention?
Well, that's where the training comes in, right? So that's why you wanted a lot of these exercises are either written exercises, so you write down these things because the process of writing them down helps you focus on one thing or another, or they are mindfulness exercises. In that sense, actually, the exercise is not that different, from some kinds of Buddhist meditations. So, for instance, a classic Zen meditation, a classic Buddhist meditation, is about getting rid of thoughts you don't want. Right now, you can't get rid of thoughts by just pushing them out or just I'm not going to think about this. That you can't do that. There's just the human brain doesn't work that way. But the Buddhists say, yeah, but what you can do is, okay, so there's this disturbing thought, right? For instance, the dread that I'm going to be fired because my performance hasn't been up to task. Okay, so let me close my mind and imagine that that particular dread, that thing that I'm worried about, it's actually a little thing. It's a photograph or it's a drawing, and then I can gently take it, put it on a leaf, gently put the leaf on a stream, and then watch the stream carry this thing away. If you do that over and over, this is a visualization exercise, right? You do it by closing your eyes and then over and over imagining this scene. The notion is, and it works, I just ask any Buddhist practitioner, the notion is that over time, you're going to be able to worry less and less about that thing. Now, of course, I'm going to warn your readers, this is not a magic pill. It's not like, oh, well, that's it, done. I'm going to do these exercise once, and I'm never going to have a worry for the rest of my life. No, that's not the way it works. Yeah. And because Stoicism is not magic. It's a philosophy, and it's a set of techniques, but it's not magic. But again, think about the analogy with the gym, right? You wouldn't go to the gym on the first day and say, ask your trainer to show you the weights, and then you start lifting weights, and you say, okay, that's it, done. Now I'm good for the rest of my life. Now I can lift 100 pounds. Obviously not. If you want to get to lifting 100 pounds, you'll have to go back day after day after day and slowly and gradually improve, right? Exactly. So it's the same thing with these kind of mindful techniques. I mean, it's, it probably never happens that you are completely free of these you completely free yourself of these kind of worries. But let me tell you, I've been practicing this for a number of years now. And I noticed, my wife has noticed, my friends have noticed that now it becomes automatic to me. Whenever I have a challenge, the immediate first thought it's never a catastrophizing kind of thought. It's immediately, automatically, oh, what do I control about this? Just let me give you a very simple example that just happened last week from my own little, my own life here. So, as you know, as everybody knows, we're in the middle of a pandemic. Now, if there is something you don't want to happen in the middle of a pandemic, is your refrigerator to break down.
Yeah.
Right? Well, that's exactly what happened last week. Okay, that's an interesting challenge. Now, I could have gone and be pissed off and angry or depressed by the thing. Is like, what are we going to do now? We're not going to be able to store food, and we have to go out every day now to get only fresh food, and like, that's awful. Instead of doing that, the immediate thought was, all right, there's two things I can do immediately. First of all, shift my next grocery shopping to dry food, right? So get pasta, beans, and stuff like the canned stuff, so that I'm not going to starve until this problem is actually resolved. Second, let me call my landlady and see what she suggests. She may have an idea on how to solve this problem. And sure enough, she did. Right? She jumped on this thing and she said, oh, look, I'm sorry, I cannot, given the situation, I cannot replace your refrigerator right now because the building does not allow, large furniture to be brought in for obvious security issues, health security issues. But she said, what I can do is to have shipped to you immediately a small fridge, a little thing like the ones that people have in dorms in college, and that's going to do it for a while. And then as soon as possible, as soon as the situation improves, I'll get an actual refrigerator to replace the old one. I said, great, that works. Sure enough, for a couple of days with my wife, we ate pasta and beans. And then the third day, the new little mini fridge showed up, and now we're fine.
Yeah.
So now that's a small example, of course. I mean, this is, it's probably nobody would have gone into haywire because of this sort of situation. But the reason I'm bringing that up is because the response was now automatic. My very first thought was, okay, this is a challenge, and what can I do about this challenge? What parts of this are actionable? Forget about that it's not actionable. That I can't fix the refrigerator. I don't have the know-how, nor do I have the parts to replace whatever is wrong with the refrigerator. I can't do that. So that's outside of my control. I certainly cannot control the refrigerator breaking down. That's not up to me.
Yeah.
That just happens. It's an appliance. It's old. It happens. Stuff happens. So all of those things. So if I started to indulge in thoughts like, oh, I wish the refrigerator hadn't broken down, that's completely useless.
Yeah.
Because, well, it has. Now what are you going to do about it?
Yeah.
Wishing that something didn't happen that has already happened it's foolish, because you're wasting time on something. The past is not under your control, for sure. You cannot rewind the past and say, oh, well, I'm going to do it so that the refrigerator is not going to break down. It did. Okay, great. That's a fact of the world. Now the question immediately is, what is the best course of action to deal with that fact?
Right. So it's a lot about changing your mind through practicing. I was wondering then, for you have been practicing for quite some time. How much do you think, like, let's say if it's a new person who would like to try to start practicing Stoicism, how much do you think a person should practice each day or each week or yeah?
So there are two answers to that question. The comforting answer, I suppose, is that if we're talking about specific exercises, like, for instance, one of my favorite exercises is the evening philosophical diary. This is an exercise. It's a written exercise where before going to bed, you sit down and you write down things that have happened during the day and how you reacted to those things, noting the things that, the way you didn't react too well and the times that you did react well. Why are you doing that? Well, the reason to do that is to be more mindful about your own reactions to things, so that in the future you're going to react better to similar situations. That exercise takes only a few minutes. Okay, usually I spend like 5 minutes doing that thing. So most of these specific exercises are actually very short. They don't take a lot of time. However, the other answer to how much should I practice is pretty much every minute you're not sleeping.
Yeah.
Meaning that, right?
And
Meaning
even also in your
don't...
sleep when you consolidate the memories.
That's right. But that's not up to you. You don't control it.
That's true.
So,
that's true.
Right. And what I mean by this is there is no circumstance in your life under which you're going to say, well, fine, for this time, I'm going to stop acting like a Stoic and I'm just going to, be an Epicurean or whatever. But no, because then you ruin your training. In fact, Epictetus is very
is that a curse word, saying that you're?
yeah, that's right. Okay. It's a bad word.
Okay.
It's a bad word. Epictetus says, if you stop doing, you should. He says you should be the person you want to be. Every moment, you should try to be a person you want to be every moment of your life, whether there are other people around or not. If you relent, if you just let it go, if you get distracted, then you undermine your own progress. Think about it this way. Use one of the analogies that we already used a couple of times. Use the analogy with a good, healthy diet, right? Well, if you decide to eat in a healthy fashion, and you say, okay, this is good for me. This is what I want to do, etc. And you start doing it. But then occasionally you say, oh, you know what? Health is not that interesting. Let me have a triple cheeseburger with fries.
Yeah.
Well, that undermines your progress. It's not the end of the world. You could do something like that and still recover, and you go back to your healthy self. But the fact is, the more often you let go, the more often you allow yourself to slip up, the more you undermine your own progress. Or again, it's the same with going to the gym. Going to the gym is something you need to do, if not daily, certainly several times a week. If you all of a sudden tell yourself, well, you know what, this month I don't feel like doing it. well, then you're going to lose a lot.
Yeah.
You're gonna undermine a lot of the progress you made. So specific exercises take only a few minutes. But in terms of being mindful of what you do, paying attention to what you do, that's pretty much a, every day, every minute kind of work.
Right. I'm also interested to know. Let's say that it's somebody new again who would like to start practicing Stoicism. What do you think is a good setup for that person?
What do you mean by setup?
I mean, the plan perhaps is a better word. Like,
plan.
Like how to go about it.
I would say pick a small number of exercises that work for you, and then start practicing. And if some exercises don't actually work, that turn out not to work for you very well, then drop those and replace them with others. On my website, on my Patreon website, there is an article that I published not long ago called My Stoic Practice, 9 Simple Exercises. And that's what it is. It's 9 of my own favorite exercises. Some of them are daily exercises. I do them all every day. Some of them are daily exercises. Some of them are weekly exercises. Some of them are occasional exercises, once in a while. And those are the ones that, over the years, I think work best for me. Okay. So it's my own personalized practice, which means that it might not be the best for somebody else, but you might want to start there. Take a look at the article and say, oh, all right, so this is the way. So make a plan, or use the book, the handbook that I co-wrote with Craig. Go through the beginning. As I said in the introduction, we actually have a list, as it turns out, also of 9 exercises, although those are different ones. And pick, even if not even 9, pick just 3. One from each section of the book. The book is divided into 3 sections. Pick those 3 and say, okay, beginning today, I'm going to do these 3 exercises on a regular basis and see how that works. As I said, some of them might not work for you, in which case you can replace them, browse through the book and read about other exercises. And if anything strikes you like, okay, this is something I might need, then do that. So basically what I'm suggesting is start small. Don't get over, because if you start getting overwhelmed, then you're probably going to give up. This is the problem. Again, let me forgive me for using the same metaphors over and over, but that is what the Stoics were doing.
Yeah.
Again, you don't start going to the gym by lifting 100 pounds.
True.
Unless you can already do it.
Yeah.
You start with 10 pounds and then you move your way up. So similarly, don't start with 50 exercises. Start with a couple, and then move your way up. That's the way not to get overwhelmed. That's the same way in which diets work. If you're on a diet all of a sudden you go on a stringent diet and you don't eat anything at all, that's not going to work. That's not sustainable. You're going to give it up. But if you work little by little on modifying your habits, then that's sustainable over the future. So it has to be something sustainable. Start small and do something that is sustainable, that you feel you can do over and over, day after day, week after week.
For sure.
However, don't wait until tomorrow. Start today. Epictetus says in Enchiridion, which is his manual for a happy life, he says, what are you waiting for? The Olympic Games have already started and you're behind. It's like, your life has already started. It's like, so all these people, for instance, that, there's this cultural tradition in the West, at least, of making New Year's resolutions, right? And I never understood that tradition. I never done it myself. I don't understand that because if you think that something is good for you, whatever it is, like, quit smoking or drink less or whatever it is, be nicer to your colleagues. If you think it's good for you, why the hell do you want to wait until January 1st?
Yeah.
I mean, you should be doing it right here, right now.
It's a good
right?
point.
What are you waiting? Yeah, and that's exactly what Epictetus says. What are you waiting for? This is about your own self-improvement. Surely you don't want to postpone your self-improvement, right?
Yeah, for sure. And I must say that I done particularly like the 2 first exercises in your book, and I've really felt that this has has had quite an effect on me. And I've tried a lot of different stuff, and I've really felt the effect of doing these 2 exercises. So I really Yeah, I think it's something that somebody who's listening, somebody who is interested, definitely should check out.
Yeah. Well, both of those exercises are about the dichotomy control, and in fact, the second exercise kind of builds on the first one. However, what I would suggest in general to sort of your listeners is, if they want to sample one exercise from each of the three parts of the book. And the reason I'm saying this is because those three parts are not arbitrary. There's a reason why the book is organized into three sections, and these three sections follow Epictetus' three disciplines. So Epictetus says that there are three areas of improvement that we need to work on. Okay? One is our desires and aversions, what we think is good for us and not or not good for us. The second one is our actions. How do we behave toward other people? And the third one is our judgments, how we think about stuff. Right? So each one of those, each discipline comes with a set of exercises in the book. And so I think that it's actually important to sample from each one of the three sections, because it's the three things combined. Ideally, what you want to do is all three things simultaneously. You want to go through your life by making good judgments about situations, by acting well toward other people, and by seeking the kind of stuff that is good for you and staying away from the kind of stuff that is not good for you. And so these actually really work together in kind of a nice, harmonious ensemble. So I would say try to sample one exercise from each one of the three sections, and that's probably a very good way to start practicing.
Yeah, for sure. I can highly recommend it. The book again is called A Handbook for New Stoics. And if somebody would like to find you online, or where can people find you?
There's a couple of places. I am on Twitter at M Pigliucci, so MPIGLIUCCI, or they can find me at massimopigliucci.com. So that's my first and last name as one word.com. That's the site where I basically publish everything. All my events, all my essays, books, and stuff like that. It's all there. The podcast, it's all there.
Perfect. Massimo, once again, big thank you for coming on and helping us how to try out Stoicism.
Yes, thank you for having me again, and stay safe.
Hope you enjoyed the episode. Friends, I really need your help. I'm trying to get the podcast out there. So I was wondering if you could help me by leaving a positive rating and a review on your Apple device or the podcast player that you're using, as well as subscribing to the podcast. That really helps getting the show more visible on iTunes and other players. And if you don't know how it's done, then YouTube has a lot of great videos, so you can search there. All right, that's it. Take care.